Good morning. It's Tuesday, and I have Mr. Commissioner Bill Baertlein here. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning.
You wanted to talk about, well, and I want to talk about it too because I have questions. Kind of about the Salmonberry Trail, what happened last week, what happened on Friday, and what the current status is and will be going forward, right?
Right.
Kind of, sort of, all of that.
Kind of all of that.
You know what? Real quick before we start, I wanted to mention today, and I'll mention at the end of the show too. Today at the bridge, they're putting in girders because when I came, did you see all the traffic
I saw
stopped?
them coming in.
Yeah. So traffic is stopped. I don't know how they said they're going to try to do it in intermittent periods, but just be aware that if you're going over the bridge, there may be a period where you're stopped for, I don't know, up to 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. I don't know.
So
because they're bringing in some big, huge pieces of their girders. Yeah, for the new bridge on the other side, on the west side. So if you're coming in and around town, Wilson River Loop is probably your best bet.
I would agree. It's going to be jammed up there.
Yeah, and I think they said from 8 to 4 and not stopped that whole entire time. Once they get one girder set, they're going to let all the traffic flow through and kind of clean up, and then they're going to bring another one in, but it's going to be at periods throughout the day. So
It'll be intermittent.
Yeah. So if you're going north or south of town and you have to go in between 101 and Highway 6, maybe take Wilson River Loop.
Yep. But
anyway,
I'm really excited about what I'm seeing being done. It's really going to make a difference for
downtown
downtown
I feel
Tillamook.
bad for them when they're out in the rain, but I'm also thankful that they're continuing to work in the rain and not just being like, oh, there's a storm, we're stopping. So
You'd never get it done.
I know. That's what I'm saying. I'm thankful that that's what there's still a lot to do though, and I'm nervous about the time, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Salmonberry Trail.
Salmonberry Trail. I'm going to begin at the beginning for me.
Sounds like a good place to start.
And that was almost 8 years ago when the floods came through and wiped out the freight line. I mean, I'm up
2007?
About 2007, 2000, sometime in that
area. I think there were
area.
two big storms that came through 2
big
years.
Storms.
Yeah.
And the cost to fix it would have been about over $50 million at the time. And FEMA would pay 75% of that. Well, that still left the Port of Tillamook Bay needing to come up with $10 million. So they did the research on it, and the four businesses that were still using the rail line, only 2 wanted to continue using it if it got put back in business because it's quicker to do it by truck, more efficient, and you can get it to the places a lot quicker. And, you know, with the way the world is now, on-time delivery is everything.
Right.
So at that point, the state... You know, they applied to the state to do the match, and the state said, no, it's not worth it. It's not economic feasible, but we will do a match if you want to do alternative projects at the port. So FEMA agreed to some alternative projects at the port, and they put in all the new infrastructure, all the new buildings, everything out at the port. But the railroad line at that point was basically non-existent. It didn't operate. So in my little mind, was thinking between Tillamook and the cheese factory would be a nice place to have a trail for people to walk. You know, Tillamook doesn't have any places for our kids to ride our bikes, for people to go for walks at night with their dogs or in the evenings.
Well, at the time they didn't. Now we have a junior high trail, but still that's only a small loop.
8 years ago we didn't, and we do have the new trail going in on the Hocourt that the city's putting, which is part of the Salmonberry Trail, or will be when it's completed. So that's where I came from, and we had a preliminary meeting clear back then with Department of Forestry. They wanted to start doing the trail already back then, and we said no because of the FEMA projects going on. If we were to sell the track, all that money would go to FEMA. So we took a step back, and then my last year on the port board, which would have been 2012, 13 in that area, 2012 was my last year. There was a meeting at the State Forestry Center called by the State Forestry, Parks, Senator Johnson, Commissioner Labhart, and Bicycle Oregon. And we all met up there, and they said it's time to do a feasibility study. So we did the feasibility study on the whole line, and that was done with a $200,000 donation from Bicycle Oregon.
And was that a feasibility study for a trail or a feasibility study to see if you could still maintain the railway?
It was a feasibility study for the trail.
Okay.
Concept plan for the trail. Can we even
do
do
it?
Trail?
Right.
Conclusion was, yes, we can. And so out of that, we then started the process of forming a committee that could rail bank it and take over on a rail banking once it got to that point. So we put together STIA, the Salmonberry Trail Intergovernmental Agency, of which there are 4 voting members. One is the Port of Tillamook Bay, one is Tillamook County, one is the head of state parks, and one is the head of the state forestry. So we are the 4 voting members on there. So there's half of the board is represented locally by Tillamook area electeds.
Right.
So the Tillamook folks do have a say in how it's been proceeding. At the same time, that was my last year on the port board, and we negotiated a lease with Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad to put in their steam train operations.
Yep.
It was a fledgling organization, so we gave them 5 years free use of the rail line. You know, we didn't do that with anybody else. I mean, so when people come and say the port board does not support OCSR, they're just totally wrong. We gave them a sweetheart deal to get started. Imagine if we gave a warehouse to the creamery for 5 years free lease.
Right.
I mean, you just don't do that in a port situation. But we did, and we negotiated a very
gracious,
a 15-year lease.
Oh, okay.
And and it was actually a pretty. It was a win-win towards the last 10 years. So that's the lease that kind of is in play right now. A little bit. There's 9 years left on it. All through this procedure, the port board has always said rail with trail. That's what they support. And
I know Michelle's come in. She comes in once a month-ish, and every time we've talked about it, she's explained the difference of rails to trails and rails with trails, and this is supposed to. The intention is to be rails with trails.
Right. The portion that's OCSR leases is supposed to be rails with trails. The other portion on the east side probably will just be a trail. It's over there. It's going to be a lot easier to do, and that's quite frankly.
Are we talking about like the Washington County side?
Washington County.
Yeah. Okay.
They're going to be, that's just remove the tracks and put down the asphalt, basically.
Because there's not really a train going up there anyway,
no,
right?
It's dead.
Yeah.
It's dead. As a matter of fact, it's going to cost so much to remove the track out of there because it's so overgrown that they're going to lose money on just even removing the track.
Yeah.
And so at that point, with the STIA board, we'll back up to where STIA was. We started the negotiations with the port and to be a trail partner. And one of the reasons that it needed to be rail banked at that point, and a trail partner, is that at that point it's been basically abandoned and it reverts back to the former owners. So if that rail line reverted back to the former owners, OCSR wouldn't be in business, and we would have no way of putting a railroad back in at a future date. So we're at a position where we have to do the rail banking. There's no way around it. So to do the rail banking, number one, you apply with the railroad group out of the federal railroad group, transportation board. To do that, you first of all you do the formal abandonment process, which was done. The railroad was abandoned, and a rail partner was identified, which was the intergovernmental agency group.
Gotcha.
The next step is hammering out a formal agreement between the port, STIA, and one that would be usable or allowed by the federal government, because the trail partner has to have control. I mean, otherwise you won't comply with the federal rules. So we put together a lease. I was the convener for the work group that worked on that. We spent almost 2 years working on that lease. It was a monumental project because we had the state parks involved, we had the forestry involved, we had the port involved, we had and the county involved in hammering out this lease that would meet the minimum requirements of the federal government and keep the port whole so that they could continue to get money off their leases that they have with the different areas, and to protect the port's interest and yet protect the STIA's interest. So the lease we came up with, we were pretty well done with it a year ago, and then we decided we needed to have the Oregon Department of Justice look at it. They looked at it. We've had rail attorneys look at it. We've had the port attorney look at it. We've had county attorney looked at it. We've had more attorneys look at that thing than Carter has pills, I guess, as the old saying used to go. So the final agreement does have some things in it that made the OCSR uncomfortable.
The verbiage.
The verbiage. And the primary one, I believe, is that, the leases that are in effect now and the automatic renewals, those continue on. But a new lease then becomes negotiable. And the STIA does have some ability to say, no, we don't like that lease. It's going to materially impact the trail. So that is in there. But at this point, I don't see how OCS&R is going to have a material impact on the trail. I mean, if we can do it side by side, it should be fine.
Right.
Like I said, everything we have done up to this point is rail with trail along the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad section. Yes, we've even spent $100,000 to do a study to see if we can do rail with trail.
Right.
And it came out, yes, we can. It's going to cost more money, but we're not looking at something that's going to happen in the next 20 years. We're looking at a timeline of 50 to 100 years. So this is way too early to start all of the wringing of hands. Oh, we're going to lose the railroad, or we're going to lose the trail. This is the time we work collaboratively and try to make it happen.
Right. Well, one thing you mentioned to me, and I don't think you mentioned it, or if you did, it wasn't super clear, but you mentioned to me before we started that when you rail banked the railroad, there was certain verbiage that had to be included as part of the lease.
Right.
And some of that verbiage is what is kind of causing the red flags for the...
I believe so. I believe that is the problem. Because, to be able to rail bank something, you have to have it a certain amount of controls by the... rail bankers, by STIA. We have to have a certain level of control in order to rail bank it, because the federal government, when you rail bank it, it means you're preserving it to come back to a railroad at a future date.
Sure.
So if the port decided that they wanted to lease it to a farmer and take out the track and make it farming, or sell it to a farmer, we could say no.
Right.
That we need to retain that lease.
Right.
And so that protection,
you as STIA could
we
say no.
as STIA could say no, because that would materially impact it, because you wouldn't have a trail there for a mile or two.
Right. So, I have to take a quick break. We're going to talk about Clark's Plumbing. Do you know one of those do-it-yourself kind of guys? They're always telling you to do it yourself. Well, sometimes that isn't the best solution. You're in luck, whether it's a leaky faucet, a complete bathroom remodel, or maybe replacing that septic system. Do yourself a favor. Call Clark's Plumbing. They're professionals. They'll get the job done. And anything, new installations, upgrades, that stopped-up drain, you name it, they can do it. So the next time you hear do it yourself, do yourself a favor and call 842-5105. That's 842-5105 for the professionals at Clark's Plumbing. So I'm talking with Commissioner Baertlein this morning, and we're talking about the Salmonberry Trail and STIA and the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad. I was looking on their Facebook page, and I know one of the things that they're really concerned about is the rights that the port loses. I'm using air quotes because I'm still not super clear on this. If this lease is signed or the agreement is signed or whatever, that the port loses rights. But what I do think is interesting is that you are on the STIA board, right?
Right.
And that is Michelle also? Or somebody from the port is on it,
Jack Mulder,
right?
one of the port commissioners, is on there.
So I can understand some of the rights being shifted over to this group, but it's not like this group is not people who don't live here, I guess.
That's right. And it's the part of the agreement is the port's going to get $5 a foot for every foot that the trail puts in place. That's a couple $1 million for it. So the port is not coming out of this just giving it away.
Right.
Yes, they're giving up a little control, but the potential's there for them to get a little over $2 million from that part of it. So, and they have given up control to Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad. If you really want to think about it, the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad has control for the next 9 years.
Right. on their current lease.
On their current
Now,
lease.
is their current lease also being renegotiated?
That is being renegotiated now, and what the STIA board has proposed is that we put together a work group with a couple members from STIA, a couple members from the port, and then members of OCSR to sit down and come up and see what the extension should look like or would look like.
Right. Well, I mean, it's, you're reaching out to try to help and see what you can do.
What we can do together, because we need to figure out how we can make it work for both entities, not just one or the other. This isn't an either or thing. This has to be a together thing as we move forward. And it's in everybody's best interest to do both.
Right. How many leases, do you know how many leases the port has?
I would think there are probably several hundred.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's a very long
It's long,
rail.
and all of those encroachments and all of those places where people have driveways and all of those, and those really aren't even in play here because those leases will stay in effect.
Right.
Because they're not impacting the trail operation.
Yeah.
So, and we've talked about that because part of the agreement is that every time the port renews one of those, they're supposed to let STIA know, well, we're going to work around that and say, hey, all of these, you don't need to let us know on these minor ones. I know there was talk about how the port was going to lose the ability with the cable companies. Well, that's not true. The port has
Right, utilities was mentioned.
Utilities, they retain that right. That does not go to STIA. If STIA puts a trail in between up the Salmonberry where all of the utilities are gone, that area might be a little different story because they would be using the STIA trail to put in utilities.
Sure. I think I what am I trying to say? I have like two thoughts running around in my brain. I think it's interesting that, like I said, that there are two on the voting STIA board. Because how many agencies are a part of STIA? Which, by the way, is Salmonberry Trail Intergovernmental Agency, which kind of brings together a collaborative group of people that are all affected by this, right?
Right, and so there are,
or have a hand in it. We'll need to have.
Okay, so we have the 4 voting members, which are the Tillamook County, the port, state parks, and state forestry. We're the 4 permanent voting members that have signed on to this. We also have Washington County as an ex officio member. Senator Betsy Johnson is an ex officio member. Debbie Boone is an ex officio member. We have the tribe as an ex officio member. There are a number of ex officio members that are in Bicycle Oregon. We've just got a number of people on there.
So it's a pretty decent sized group.
It's a decent sized group. The state legislature has approved the trail. The governor is supportive of the trail. When we were having our meeting Friday, and we did adopt the lease at Friday and agreed to sign it, one of the folks in the audience came up and said, this is kind of a monumental time for the trail. He said, this is going to be as big as a lot of the state parks and federal parks in Oregon when it's said and done. He said, don't forget, you're part of something that's bigger than you. And it does make sense. If we can get this trail done in the next 50 years, it'll be a legacy to our families and to our children and our grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren that can say, yes, we've got this trail that is beneficial to the community. That's been my draw on this trail the whole time is it improves the quality of life for the people that live in Tillamook County.
Right.
And it is for the people in Tillamook County. Along this coastal section, it is really important that we work on that.
Right. So, yeah, I think it's interesting. While there is a large group of people from kind of all over the valley area and the coast, that the half of the voting group is from Tillamook.
It is.
2 of the 4 are from Tillamook. So there is still 50% representation of Tillamook County for the voting members. Right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And the intention is not to rip out the railroad.
No. The intention is not to rip out the railroad. The intention is to work together to come up with a spot to put the trail beside the rail.
Which will be interesting as I kind of picture where the railroad is. That's why I'm not an engineer.
Yeah, there are going to be some challenging areas. There's no doubt about it. But those areas are not going to get tackled for 25, 30
Right.
years.
It'll all be done in kind of
It's
pieces.
going to be done in little segments. And I really think the first segment is going to be Rockaway Beach.
Well, it's got a nice. I mean, it's got such a big
it's wide.
area.
You're not crossing a lot of estuaries.
Right.
It's and it'll be a nice pilot project to see how we can make it work rail and trail all the way up and down it. Then be kind of groundbreaking there.
Yeah. So what are kind of? Well, actually, let me take a break and then we can talk about kind of what are the next steps. I mean, I know the Hocarton Little Trail is starting to be worked on. Let's see. Tillamook is farm country, and nobody serves this farming community better than the co-op, Tillamook's Country Store. The co-op is actually 3 stores in one. Are you looking for work clothes, hickory shirts, work boots, rubber boots, rain gear, and gloves? The co-op has it. You'll find fencing, stock tanks, and everything from PVC to 18-inch culvert pipe in stock at Tillamook's Country Store. And no more hunting for that hard-to-find bolt. You'll find a complete selection, galvanized or stainless, whatever you need, in standard and metric, O-rings, boat drain plugs, they've got it all. Tillamook's Country Store treats you right. When you stop for fuel, your windows are always washed because they care about their customers. And the kids count too. There's toy tractors, trailers, trucks, and animals for that young farmer in your life. Plus, the co-op has Purina feeds to help your livestock thrive. Offering quality products since 1936, Tillamook Farmers Co-op is Tillamook's Country Store. So we're talking with Commissioner Bill Baertlein this morning about Salmonberry Trail and kind of all of the stuff that went on last week. And what are the next steps now that this has been signed or adopted? Or
right.
Is that, am I using the right terminology?
Yeah. Then the next step will be for the Oregon Coast Scenic Railroad is negotiating an extension to the lease. And so that's probably the next step there. The next step for the STIA board, we need to start getting the organization in place that could operate the trail and do maintenance on the trail as we build it. So we need to have all of those pieces in place before we get started building. On the east side, the Washington Visitors Association donated $100,000 to do the same in-depth study on the east side that we did on the coastal segment.
Okay.
So they will be coming up with the engineering to put in the trail on the east side. And I assume, or I think that that's probably where the first part of the trail is going to start, is over there, because it ties right into the Banks Vernonia Trail. They can do a loop, and then they get into the canyon.
Right.
The canyon section, that's probably way down the road, because there's a lot of work in there. There's areas where you're going to have to leave the rail line and go onto state forestry property. You can't even walk through there at this point.
Yeah.
You can, but it's dangerous. So there's going to be a ton of engineering and work to do in that section. On the coast, Tillamook City, between Tillamook City and the Creamery, we're starting to look at an alternative route rather than the rail line, mainly because right there it would be very difficult to do rail with trail.
Yeah, it kind of runs right through the middle of farms.
It's right in the middle of 2 milk parlors areas and holding areas, and I don't know how we would do rail with trail there. So we're looking at an alternative route between the city and the Creamery, and the Creamery's working with us on that.
Cool.
We are going to be the city, I believe, will be applying for a $15,000 grant from the TLT to do the preliminary study to find out where it can go and the feasibility. I would really like to see us start from that point, and if we possibly can use a little TLT money to start the trail from Tillamook to the Creamery. I think that would be a really nice area to go through and a really probably fairly easy area to get to. So that's what I'm pushing for. I don't know, it's a big, long process. We have the Heritage Foundation, the Forest Heritage Foundation up there at the State Forestry is working on getting donations. We're looking at, probably $150 to $200 million project when it's all said and done.
Just from the whole thing, or just the city? Oh, okay.
The whole thing, and once it's done. And so we have to have some assurances, and that was part of the lease agreement too, is to get the assurances to the big donors that are willing to put some money out there.
Right. Yeah, it's nice to see. I know I'm kind of excited to see how the Hocarton little trail up to Goodspeed's gonna work out. I see them all the time. Well, not all the time, but every once in a while they're up there on the track doing something.
Right.
I don't know. I can't see when I'm driving by because it's above me. But yeah, it's interesting, and I'm interested to see what it's going to be when it's done. It'll be a nice little way to get from Hocarton over to Goodspeed and have like a little place to kind of walk back and forth there.
It'll be really nice for the city.
Yeah, and the Hocarton Park and little display area is supposed to be real nice too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And then if we can get a trail to the creamery, we can all ride our bikes out and have ice cream.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's great too. I mean, for us, yes, it's awesome. I mean, we always need more places. I talk about it all the time. I lived in San Diego for 10 years, and every single surface street had like a 4-foot wide bike lane on either side of it. Yeah, it was a 4-lane surface street, like a regular road, but they all had bike lanes. And so I trained for a 100-mile bike ride, and it was super easy because there was places to ride your bike everywhere.
Yeah.
Not so much. I actually sold my bike when we moved here because I wasn't going to ride around on these streets.
No,
it makes me scared.
It's too dangerous. And
then in the summertime, you see, the cyclists like on 131 or going up Highway 6. That just, I say a prayer as I go by them.
Yeah.
That scares me. Yeah. So it'll be cool when it's all said and done. Don't know it'll be in our lifetime, but
I maybe in yours.
Maybe.
At least we'll have a little segment.
Yeah.
Yours.
Well, it'll be good. I think if there's any takeaways here, if there was one takeaway, what would you like people to take away from this conversation?
I would like people to say that we can work collectively and make it happen with both the trail and the railroad.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's always been the intent. And I know this lease has been very divisive, and I don't like that in the community. We don't need that. We need to work together to make both happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The intention was rails with trails, not rail to trail. Rails with trails
yep. along the scenic railroads.
Hey, thanks for coming in today and shedding a little bit more light on the whole thing.
Sure.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Tomorrow we will have, I think, all the people here from Charity Drive, so it's always a fun and full show. Don't forget Senior Meals, noon every weekday at the Kiowanda Community Center in Pacific City, as well as the Tillamook Senior Center at 4th and Stillwell. Cost is $3 for seniors and $6.75 for everyone else. We'll talk about it tomorrow, but just a note, Charity Drive starts this Friday. On Saturday, Kurt Schrader will be at the Rockaway Beach Civic Facility from 2 to 3, holding a town hall meeting. Also on Saturday from 6:30 to 9:30, Your Arts Desire is being held at the Kiowanda Community Center. This is a benefit for the Community Arts Project Art Literacy Programs for Nestucca and Garibaldi grade schools with an art sale, silent auction, raffle, food, drinks, and live music. You can purchase tickets at communityartsproject.net. The annual Art for the Heart Gallery reception is being held Sunday at the NCRD from 1 to 3. They'll have music, food, drinks, art sale, and more. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, they are setting girders at the new bridge, so they're going to have intermittent traffic delays where literally 101, I think, is going to get shut down for some time. So if you are going through town, probably Wilson River Loop is probably a good idea. And happy birthday to Megan Yost over at the post office.
Hey.
Yeah. Bill, thanks again for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
And thank you, Tillamook, for listening.